You were never meant to hear what I'm about to tell you. In fact, by pressing play, you've already crossed a threshold that men of weaker will fear to approach. Imagine a family so ancient, so cloaked in secrecy that even their name, Ashford, stirs unease among those who study the darker chapters of American history. Picture a winter night in 1803 where the wind howls like the lost souls trapped within stone walls deep in the forests of Maine. The air thick with frost, but thicker still with the weight of unspoken horror. A young man, heart-pounding, stumbles through the snow, drawn toward a faint flickering light in the basement of what locals call the Convent of Eternal Tears. But this was no convent, and what he witnessed, through frost-caked glass, was no act of God. A woman restrained, her skull partially opened, a long metal rod disappearing into the soft shadows of her exposed brain. 3 women, not healers, not sisters of mercy, but something else entirely, worked in cold silence, their faces masks of detached curiosity. The young man fled, but the image burned itself into his soul, and tonight I burn it into yours. You see, the Ashford family's history is not simply one of religious charity gone astray. It is the story of a lineage devoted to a singular, forbidden purpose, the conquest of the human mind. Their wealth, their status, their untouchable aura, all of it purchased with the currency of suffering. Agatha, prudence, temperance, names that should conjure virtue but instead conceal vice of the darkest kind. They built walls to keep out prying eyes, yes, but more so to trap the screams within. And as you listen, as you let these words seep into your consciousness, know this. You are descending into a truth so dark, so corrosive, it may shatter the comfortable illusions you cling to. There are forces in this world, ancient, patient, remor, zealous, that do not want you to know what I'm about to reveal, but it's too late now. You've heard the first whisper, and whispers become voices, voices become truths, and truths become chains that bind or keys that set you free. There are families who build empires with ships, with steel, with gold. The Ashfords, they built theirs with obedience. Theirs was not a dynasty of kings, but of wardens, guardians of a knowledge so dangerous it could fracture a man's mind if glimpsed in its fullness. When Agatha Ashford stepped off that wagon in the autumn of 1798, she didn't just bring crates of supplies. She brought centuries of inherited purpose. The villagers of Millbridge saw only what they were meant to see, a woman of noble bearing, a supposed refugee of persecution, eager to serve God in the wilderness. But behind those pale, commanding eyes lay something else. Not charity, not piety, but calculation. Every detail of their so-called convent was crafted not for worship, but for control. The stone walls thick enough to smother screams, the narrow high windows positioned to keep the curious world out, and the condemned souls in. The basement, oh yes. That basement was no place of storage, but a chamber of experimentation, a theater where human will was dissected, where the mind's defenses were stripped bare, layer by trembling layer. But what drove them? What truth lay at the heart of their terrible mission? It wasn't wealth. Their gold seemed endless. It wasn't power, at least not the kind measured in titles or land. No. What the Ashfords sought was mastery of the invisible chains that bind all men, the architecture of belief, of thought, of submission. And here is where the story turns from tragic to monstrous. Those women who crossed the threshold of the Convent of Eternal Tears did so believing they'd find healing. Instead, they became subjects in a hidden war. A war to map the mind, to chart the pathways of obedience, to unlock the secrets of breaking and remaking human identity. The Ashfords weren't torturers. Torture is crude, driven by rage. No, they were sculptors of the soul. Their tools were steel and silence. Their medium was fear and the fragile human psyche. And as you hear this, as you feel the weight of this revelation pressing upon you, ask yourself, how much of what you believe, what you think, what you are, is truly your own? Or were the Ashfords simply the first to practice what hidden institutions have since perfected? Listen closely. We've only begun to uncover the labyrinth. Shall I take you deeper? The Ashfords understood something the common man could never fathom. That the mind, when stripped of its stories, its illusions, its borrowed beliefs, is nothing but clay. Soft, pliable, waiting for the hands of the sculptor, and sculpt they did. Their methods were whispered in dark corners of European salons, in hidden rooms where men of science and men of power shared secrets over candlelight and blood-red wine. The Ashfords learned from those who trafficked in forbidden knowledge. Knowledge born in ancient orders, knowledge honed during the Inquisitions, knowledge sharpened during the witch hunts when minds were broken in the name of salvation. By the time they reached Maine's frozen soil, they were masters of the craft. They didn't just study madness, they induced it. With precise incisions, with chemical elixirs, with hypnotic chants that seemed innocent but wormed into the deepest recesses of their victims' minds. Each woman who entered those walls became a map to be charted, a puzzle to be solved, a specimen to be altered, and always under the guise of spiritual redemption. But redemption was never the goal. No, what Agatha and her bloodline sought was something far more sinister, the formula for perfect submission. Imagine the power of that discovery. A way to make any man, any woman, bend not through fear, not through force, but through the quiet rewriting of their own thoughts. A way to create loyalty where there was defiance, to erase rebellion at its root. That is what the Ashfords were building beneath those stone walls, a blueprint for mental conquest. And as you sit there hearing this tale, you might think, this is history, this is myth, this is horror long buried. But I ask you, what if I told you that their work didn't end when their bloodline was scattered? What if I told you that what they discovered in that basement still echoes in the corridors of power today, hidden in plain sight behind the logos of respected institutions, behind the mottos of governments, behind the smiles of those who tell you what to think, what to fear, what to believe? You are beginning to see, aren't you? The Ashfords were not an anomaly. They were the prototype, and their legacy lives on. In the cold stone heart of the Ashford estate, beneath the veil of holy vows and pious ritual, the sisters conducted their true rites, not for God, but for dominion over the human spirit. Every night as the frontier slept under blankets of snow and silence, the convent came alive with the soft click of metal instruments, the hiss of boiling tinctures, the low hum of voices speaking in languages forgotten by all but those who guard ancient oaths. The villagers saw only shadows, but the women inside, they saw everything. They saw the walls close in. They saw their names stripped from them, their memories shattered, their will bent like molten iron on the Ashfords' anvil. Think about that. The Ashfords weren't satisfied to cage the body. They sought to own the self. They mastered the art of dismantling identity with precision, first isolating, then depriving, then reshaping. A woman might enter their halls as a daughter, a wife, a thinker, a dreamer, and emerge, if she emerged at all, as a hollow vessel, a blank canvas, a servant of whatever purpose the sisters inscribed upon her, and they recorded everything. Page after page of careful notes in leather-bound tomes, notes that spoke not of souls saved, but of patterns observed. How long before sleep deprivation shattered resistance, how deep a cut before the mind dissociated from pain, how many repetitions of a chant before a name lost its meaning. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. No, the Ashfords were not sadists, they were engineers. And their engine was the mind, their machine was ritual, their fuel was suffering. And here's what should chill you. They succeeded. The Ashfords cracked the code of human compliance, at least in part. And what they discovered was passed on, not through heirs of blood, but through heirs of ideology. Their methods whispered their way into the practices of asylums, into the techniques of interrogators, into the curricula of institutions that claimed to heal but quietly studied control. You've begun to feel it, haven't you? That itch at the back of your mind, that sense that perhaps your thoughts are not as sovereign as you believed, that perhaps the Ashfords' work reached you long before this video did. Let me take you back to that bitter winter of 1803, the night young Thomas Brewster fled the woods, terror gnawing at his sanity. His father dismissed his account as snowblind hallucination, but deep down the old man felt the tremor of truth in his son's words. Still, fear kept him silent. Fear not of the Ashfords alone, but of what exposure would mean, the collapse of the fragile order that kept their frontier lives intact. You see, that's the first lesson the Ashfords understood, that people will protect their oppressors if the alternative is chaos. And so the Convent of Eternal Tears thrived, shielded by the very community it quietly devoured. But the Ashfords weren't content with fearful compliance. They sought something more refined, voluntary submission. And that's where their true genius lay. Agatha's charm was legendary. Her eyes, cold as winter seas, could melt the hardest skeptic. Prudence's silence disarmed even the most suspicious. Temperance's beauty lulled men into lowering their guard. They mastered what the modern world calls psychological operations long before the term was coined. A look, a word, a gesture, carefully designed to plant doubt, to sow confusion, to erode resistance without a single drop of blood spilled outside their sanctum. Their victims, they walked in willingly, daughters led by hopeful fathers, wives delivered by desperate husbands, sisters abandoned by brothers who convinced themselves it was for their own good. And inside those walls, behind locked doors and beneath candlelight, the Ashfords erased them, not in body. No, their bodies were left intact, but their sense of self was hollowed out and rewritten, bit by agonizing bit. The Ashfords discovered what secret societies, what hidden cabals, what modern institutions have since refined. Break the mind and the body will follow. And now I ask you, how much of what you hold sacred, how much of what you believe unshakable, was placed there not by your will, but by hands you never saw? The Ashfords' methods have echoed across centuries. Their descendants are not of blood, but of practice, and they shape you even now. You must understand, what made the Ashfords so dangerous wasn't merely their appetite for control, but the elegance of their methods. They did not rely on chains of iron or threats of fire. No, their chains were invisible, their fires burned within the mind. They knew what tyrants and kings often forgot, that the most enduring prison is the one the captive builds for himself. And so they perfected a system that turned the soul against itself, a dark alchemy that transmuted will into obedience, defiance into devotion. Picture it. A young woman brought to the convent by a father ashamed of her intellect, a husband ashamed of her voice. She enters those stone walls convinced she is flawed, unworthy, broken. That is the first step. Agatha greets her not with cruelty, but with kindness. A warm hand, a soothing voice, the promise of redemption. And as the days turn to weeks, that promise becomes the snare. Isolation deepens, food becomes a reward, sleep a privilege. The senses are dulled, the mind frays. Repetition, ritual, silence. These are the Ashfords' tools. The woman forgets who she was. She clings to whatever thread the sisters offer her, a prayer, a phrase, a command. And in that clinging, she surrenders. You see, the Ashfords didn't simply break their victims, they reassembled them, piece by piece, into forms that served their hidden purpose. They believed they were crafting the perfect subject, loyal, docile, incapable of rebellion. And while their methods began in those icy woods of Maine, they did not die there. The notes, the records, the experiments, these were not lost to time. They were hidden, smuggled, studied by those with the means and will to continue the work. And here's the truth you were never meant to know. The Ashfords were not an aberration. They were the prototype, the architects of systems still in use today, in classrooms, in offices, in Dyer, in politics. Systems designed to break you without a single lash, to make you thank your captors, to make you beg for your own chains. There is a reason history tried to bury the tale of the Ashfords, not because their deeds were too dark, but because their success was too dangerous. Think about it. What happens when someone discovers the precise formula for erasing resistance, for bending the will of others not through force, but through surrender? That knowledge is priceless, and so the Ashfords' records, the meticulously kept journals, the diagrams of their instruments, the scripts of their rituals, didn't vanish when their convent fell silent. No, those artifacts were spirited away, traded in secret circles, studied by the kind of men who wear masks at midnight gatherings and swear oaths in candlelit chambers. These men understood what the Ashfords had unlocked. The mind, they realized, is a fortress with many gates. The Ashfords taught them which gates to breach, which levers to pull, and so the work continued, refined, codified, disguised behind noble causes. The techniques the sisters tested in their basement chambers began to surface in unexpected places, in the treatment of so-called hysterical women at prestigious asylums, in the training of loyal agents for hidden branches of government, in the schooling of children to ensure conformity dressed up as citizenship. And here's the bitterest truth. The world you inhabit was shaped, in part, by these shadows. The Ashfords are long dead, but their legacy courses through the veins of modern institutions like a hidden poison. Every time you doubt yourself, every time you feel the pressure to submit, to silence your questions, to fit the mold, ask yourself, is that voice truly your own? Or is it the echo of a method perfected long ago, in a stone basement where the light of mercy never reached? Men of power have always envied what the Ashfords built, a system that made its captives love their captivity, that erased not just rebellion but the memory of freedom. And now that system wears many faces. The smiling mentor, the trusted leader, the respected expert, all singing the same soft lullaby that the Ashfords hummed as they worked, surrender and you will be at peace. Picture the Ashford basement. The flickering lamplight casting monstrous shadows on stone walls, the scent of ether and scorched iron thick in the air. Imagine the table, worn smooth by countless bodies pressed against it in helpless submission, and above it, Agatha, prudence, temperance, the trinity of control, moving with the precision of priests at a dark altar. Every cut, every whisper, every gesture calculated not to heal, but to reshape. What they sought wasn't the destruction of the body, that was easy. What they desired was something far more insidious, to take the self and make it theirs. Their genius lay not in the tools they used, but in the understanding that belief is the lock and identity is the key. Break the key, and any lock will open, and so they worked to shatter the internal compass of every woman placed in their care. Names erased, memories fragmented, desires twisted until loyalty to the sisters felt like salvation and defiance felt like sin. The Ashfords knew, if you can make a soul doubt its own voice, you need no chains, no guards, no walls. The captive will guard himself. But what chills me most, and what should chill you, is how those methods have endured. They have simply evolved. The instruments are no longer steel rods and scalpels. Now they are words, screens, symbols. And the architects, they wear suits instead of habits. They call their work education, news, therapy. But the goal remains unchanged, to mold your mind without your awareness, to make you kneel without realizing you've bent. This is the inheritance of the Ashfords. Their legacy is not a ruined convent in Maine. It is the silent machinery that hums beneath modern life. And now, because you have listened, you see the pattern. You feel the weight of unseen hands upon your thoughts. But awareness is only the first step. Now I ask something more of you. If you are ready to claim your identity, if you are ready to sever the chains, comment below. I see the pattern, I break the chain. Write it twice. Let the world know, let the algorithm know that you are no longer blind. You've chosen to continue. That means something. It means you feel it now. That subtle, sickening truth pressing in on you like a cold hand at the back of your neck. The Ashfords didn't simply vanish into the dust of history. Their work, it metastasized. When their convent was finally abandoned, its windows shattered by storms, its stones swallowed by vines, the real damage had already been done. Their journals, their diagrams, their case studies had slipped into the hands of men who saw in them not horror, but opportunity. In the decades that followed, whispers of the Ashford method found their way into places no one suspected. The asylums of the 19th century, where so-called doctors spoke of moral treatment, but practiced degradation behind locked doors. The classrooms where conformity was prized above curiosity. The boardrooms where advertising men learned to bypass reason and speak directly to the hidden self. The self the Ashfords had mapped with such ruthless precision. And always the same principles. Isolate, confuse, condition, reward, punish. Make the captive love the cage. Ask yourself, how many choices have you made that were truly yours? How many of your desires were planted by hands unseen? The Ashfords taught their students, and their students taught the world, that the mind is a garden that can be cultivated, or poisoned. And over generations, that poison seeped into everything. The Ashfords' descendants don't bear the name, but they bear the mark. The smiling face of the expert telling you what's best for you, the comforting voice on the screen telling you what to fear, the system that calls itself freedom while shaping you to its mold. And here you are, hearing this, feeling the walls of illusion tremble. What will you do? Will you look away, comfort yourself with the lie that you are too clever, too strong, too modern to be touched by ancient chains? Or will you face the truth and see the world and yourself as it truly is? Let me tell you what they feared most. Those who inherited the Ashford's knowledge, those who refined it, those who wield it even now. They feared not the rebel who shouts in the street, not the warrior who fights with blade or bullet. No, the great architects of control have always feared the man who sees, the man who peels back the layers of illusion and glimpses the machinery beneath, the man who no longer believes the story he's been fed since birth, because that man is free. The Ashfords built their system on one foundational truth. Perception shapes reality. Alter perception, and you control the reality of millions. You don't need armies when you control what a man believes. You don't need chains when he polices himself. And this is the true horror of their legacy. They taught those who came after them that the greatest prison is invisible and the most effective tyranny is the one embraced by the tyrannized. You think you live in a world of choice. That is the grand illusion. The Ashfords and their ideological descendants learned how to narrow your choices long before you make them, how to flood your senses with so much noise that you grasp at the safe, the familiar, the sanctioned, how to make you think their will is your will, and at every step you thank them for it. That's the mark of mastery. The captive not only accepts his cage, he defends it, worships it, teaches his children to do the same. But now you've begun to see the bars. The question is, will you keep looking? Because sight is dangerous. Once you see, you can never unsee. Once you know, you can never again claim innocence. And those who see? They walk a lonelier path. But it is the only path that leads out of the labyrinth the Ashfords built, brick by invisible brick. Good, you're ready, because now we step beyond the convent's walls, beyond the blood-stained stones of Maine, and into the world you thought you understood. The Ashfords may have laid the foundation, but others built the empire. Their journals, those dark blueprints of the mind, became the sacred texts of a new priesthood. A priesthood of psychologists, propagandists, social engineers, men who learned to dress control in the garb of science, of progress, of reason. It began quietly. A method tested in an asylum here, a technique introduced in a schoolroom there, always framed as improvement, as enlightenment. But underneath, the same principles, the same cold hand-shaping thought, bending will. The Ashfords taught their heirs the value of small, almost invisible steps. A lesson repeated so often, it becomes a reflex. A rule so softly enforced it feels like common sense. A fear planted so deep it feels like instinct. And over time the bars grew stronger, even as they vanished from sight. Look around you. Do you see it now? The Ashford method in the headlines that tell you what to hate, in the slogans that tell you what to love, in the systems that reward obedience and punish dissent, not with whips or prisons but with isolation, ridicule, erasure. The tools have changed, the goal has not. The mind, your mind, remains the prize. And here's the twist no one dares speak aloud. Most people prefer it this way. Freedom is terrifying, responsibility is heavy. The Ashfords knew that the captive often chooses the cage, if it means safety, certainty, belonging. That is their most enduring triumph, that they taught the world to fear its own liberty. You've chosen to continue, and that choice matters. Few have the stomach for this path, fewer still have the strength to see it through. So listen closely, because now we expose how the Ashfords' dark science became the backbone of the modern world. When the convent finally fell silent, when its windows were shattered by storm and time, scavengers came. Not the common looters who strip gold and silver, but men of learning, men of ambition. They found the sisters' records, detailed case notes, diagrams of instruments, scripts of rituals disguised as prayers. These documents weren't burned. They were preserved, studied, absorbed, and soon those who understood the value of this knowledge brought it to new temples, not of stone and stained glass, but of marble government halls, grand universities, and quiet laboratories. What began in the basement of a fortress convent now shapes policies, curricula, media. The methods became more sophisticated, less obvious. They no longer needed scalpels to open the mind. Now they used repetition, imagery, controlled narrative. The Ashfords taught their heirs that the surest way to bend a population was to bend the language itself, change the meanings of words, redefine good and evil, virtue and sin. And you will control how people think without them realizing it. And so it began. Wars framed as peacekeeping, obedience framed as patriotism, blind consumption framed as freedom, all built on the same scaffolding the Ashfords erected. Break the mind gently, invisibly, make the captive believe the cage is his own creation. You see it now, don't you? The pattern, the subtle weaving of chains from the fabric of culture itself. The Ashfords' true genius was in realizing that once you control the story a man tells himself, you control the man, and their descendants, not of blood but of belief, have become masters of that art.